Hey everybody, welcome back to the Badgerland Birding Podcast, bringing you birding news and stories from the Badger State and beyond. Today we are talking about non-native and even invasive species that you can find in the United States. Some really interesting cases of birds that have shown up and very opinionated people on both sides of the non-native species debate. So a lot to get into. How's it going, Rye? I know you're a big non-native species guy.
Yeah, I started doing research about these things for videos, and I feel like out of the two of us, I'm definitely the non-native
You're the
invasive guy.
controversy guy.
I do like a good birding controversy, and today you're going to hear about some controversy, some opinions you're not going to like, some opinions you are going to like, and then some straight up facts about things because we really run the gambit and crazy comments that we get on some of those videos as well. So
Oh yeah.
what I want to do today is talk about some of the most interesting and some of the most well-known non-native and invasive species that are now in the United States that have really taken a strong foothold here and grown to the point where we can't even get rid of them anymore if we wanted to. And I feel like each of these species really has its own story, which is fascinating when you hear about it, the way that they got here, some of the backstory, what people think about them, and if those thoughts are even accurate.
Yeah, you want to get going with number one? What you got?
I mean, I think we should start at the one that most people know the most, and I would say that's probably the house sparrow. The house sparrow is a bird that everybody's familiar with because they live in such close proximity to humans. But there's some things about them that you probably won't know. Derek, what do you think the biggest misconception is about house sparrows?
Well, I think the biggest misconception is people just say like, "Oh, that's the cute little bird that lives outside," that they're like not aggressive at all. And I feel as though people have a turning point if you are doing something with your yard, like you're putting up nest boxes, or you have a family of bluebirds, and like, "Oh, the house sparrows killed my bluebirds," and then it changes
Yep.
their whole opinion of them. That's probably the biggest misconception that they're not aggressive because people don't always see that side of them.
Yeah, I totally and completely agree with that because everything we made about house sparrows that discusses this is met with people that disagree. And they have no evidence to back it up. They're just like, no, you're wrong. They would never hurt anyone. Mine would never hurt anyone. And I'm going to try to say this in a way that's going to be as honest as possible. House sparrows are birds that are very good at surviving. And sometimes to survive, they're going to try to outcompete other species for nest sites, especially birds that are more timid, like bluebirds and even tree swallows, even though tree swallows can be kind of aggressive if you ever walk by a tree swallow nest, they'll dive bomb you. But house sparrows can outcompete them because the house sparrow will go in, destroy the nest, and even kill adults if the adults refuse to leave the nest. So they do some gruesome things. Now, on the other side of it, we have people that say that they're basically just evil because they do that. And in reality, they're just surviving. They're not really having malice necessarily. We can't really personify them like that, but we have to accept them for what they are, which is a pretty aggressive bird that dominates in the habitats that it's now in these other continents. Now, another thing that's true about them is they are actually declining in the United States, although the numbers are so big in the United States that it doesn't even really matter. They're not on any sort of watch, but they've declined even more so in Europe, where they're still a very loved bird. And a lot of people from Europe will comment, say, if you don't want them, send them to us, which I think is a great thing to do, actually. We should just box them up and ship them over to Europe.
There's probably a whole lot of things you got to worry about with like disease and genetics and all that kind of stuff.
Think how good
So
some North American genetics would be for the European house sparrow
I
population.
feel like it sounds good in theory, but it would be very complicated and probably would lead to some kind of like American disease getting into the European population
Like
and like
obesity.
decimating it or something. I don't know. But I will say I have my own house sparrow story because we had a nest box up that you could watch, and we had house runs that moved into it. And so I was watching the nest, and all of a sudden there was a house sparrow inside the box. And I was like, whoa, 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 we are not letting this happen. So I took the box down, uh, put the smaller size hole on, and then put the box back up so then only the wrens could get in. And the house sparrows still tried to get in and harass them, but they couldn't fit. But you could actually see them like sticking their head in, trying to harass the wrens. But if I didn't have the camera on, you wouldn't know. And you'd just be like, oh, house sparrows, moved in there. But you wouldn't know that they actually kicked out a native species in the house run,
Yeah.
which would have been tragic.
Oh yeah, for sure. And people listening might be like, "Oh, that's mean. You didn't let that thing use the box." We need to favor the native birds, the original native.
I'm pretty sure they used the neighbor's nest box. It just is
Jeez.
like wide open. So,
Yeah, I realize at this point they're essentially native for how long they've been here. And like I said, they've gotten to the point where there's no way to eradicate them without substantially harming the ecosystem as a whole and probably wiping out native birds as well. Derek, do you know how they got here?
Well, I know we brought them from Europe, wasn't it, to make it feel more like Europe, and then they thought that they would eat some pests, like crop pests.
Yeah, so there was a guy named Nicholas Pike who was big into
Mr. Pike.
acclimatization. Yep, which is essentially trying to bring birds and other flora and fauna from the old world to the new, in large part just because they were like, wouldn't it be better if this place was more like Europe? So they wanted people to see the wildlife in the same way that they did in Europe. So they brought stuff that people really were familiar with and were endeared to, and the house sparrow was one of those species. So he brought over an initial batch of them, and I remember the quote was, "They did not fare well," or something like that. They did not thrive, I think it was. So
There's
he doesn't,
not enough big cities
not
at
enough
that point.
gusto of that first batch, but we don't know if that means they died out or if they just were gone. And, he just lost track of them and then they were in the new world. But he brought over another batch of them, which fared much better and they were released. And then other releases of house sparrows took place from other societies similar to that. And then over time, they just did really well. They do love human habitation. They love the crevices in buildings that they can nest in. So they just did very well out competing other native species and using a lot of human structures to survive.
It's just kind of funny that you have all these bright native birds and like, let's bring the little brown birds over. Like the little not super colorful ones that just kind of chirp and don't have a true song.
I think people just thought they were cute. They were like, I remember that from back in Europe, and I would like to see more of that here, please. And by the time they realized what had happened, by the time they realized the ecological disaster that it was far too late. And some states tried to eradicate house sparrows, spent millions of dollars, I think maybe even, hundreds of millions in today's money if you extrapolated the cost, and did not do anything.
Yeah. That's a big one. And then we actually have another species, the Eurasian tree sparrow, that looks kind of similar, but in my opinion is cooler to see probably because you don't see them as often, but they're also not as aggressive, which is interesting. Do you
That's
know a
what
lot
I've
about the
heard, yeah.
origin of the Eurasian tree sparrow versus the house sparrow? Did it come
I
over in the
don't
same way or did it come
I
over
don't
later?
know a ton about them. I do know that the batch that we have in the Midwest essentially came from this big, I don't know whether it was a release or whether it was an escape situation, but kind of in the Chicago area. And then they spread over to St. Louis. So there's a lot of them in Missouri and along that Mississippi River area. And they moved north now. So we have them in Wisconsin in the central part of the state, even. And it seems like they are expanding a little bit.
I
They're,
think they
sup-
bred in the state, we found out last year.
yeah, they're supposed to not be as aggressive as the house sparrow. I don't know why. They look almost exactly the same with a few color differences. If somebody knows, you can put in the comments why they're allegedly not as aggressive. But for whatever reason, they haven't spread nearly as much as the house sparrow has.
Yeah. But they're one that I'm like, oh, cool, a Eurasian tree sparrow, like as opposed to a house sparrow. We actually had one Eurasian tree sparrow on a feeder, and on the other side of the feeder was a house sparrow. So it was interesting to compare and contrast the two species.
Yep, it was a nice dichotomy, I would say. But that's the house sparrow. We have a lot of videos on the house sparrow, how it got here. I did an entire timeline basically of the events that led to them becoming so prevalent. Did a video on the truths about them because there's a lot of misconceptions that people just emotionally don't want to deal with. So if you want to take a look at that stuff, it's out there. You want to move on to a different bird, Derek?
Yeah, actually, before we do that, I want to give a shout out to we moved our merch store over to Fourth Wall. And so I wanted to just give a real quick shout out and let people know that we have new merch available for them to check out. I can share my screen real quick so you can see some of it.
Yeah, let's
The
take a
we
peek.
ordered some. It came in like a week, so that was pretty good. And the quality seemed nice. I'd say better than the other company we were working with. So you can go to badgerlandbirding-shop.fourthwall, Fourth wall.com. This is some of the stuff we have. The I've Seen a Snipe t-shirt, Life is Rough, different locations, some Migration Madness stuff. You're pissing me off with an angry blue-gray gnatcatcher with the angry eyebrows. No Regrets, Only Egrets t-shirt, Nuts About Nut Hatches, Puffin Party, bunch of different stuff. There's also our logo sweatshirt and a lot of things for people to check out. Just wanted to mention that we have that available and hopefully it all ships in a timely manner.
Yeah, very
But I
good.
think I think we should move on to the Starling.
Yeah, I feel like that's pretty much the next big one. Before we move away from the merch, though, I got the hummingbird t-shirt. with the three hummingbirds on it, and I think it looks fantastic. I think that design that you did is really cool with
I'm a
there's
big
three
hummingbird
hummingbirds
guy.
around a flower. I love hummingbirds. I haven't seen nearly as many as you though in or for my life list. But let's move on to starlings because starlings are another similar situation to house sparrows. In my opinion, they're not quite as aggressive, but they are another cavity nesting birds. They do compete with native species. The starling is funny because it was really one guy that's attributed with bringing starlings over, and his name is Eugene Schieffelin. He had a hand in bringing a lot of different birds over, including house sparrows, and then a bunch of them that never did well in the U.S. So he brought over skylarks, and
Wouldn't that be interesting if there were just skylarks everywhere?
yeah, I think he tried to
Can't you
bring over
still find
European
them in certain
robin.
places?
I don't know that actually. You
Maybe
think you
like
can
on
find
eBird.
skylarks?
So in Ken Kaufman's book, Kingbird Highway, I remember he went somewhere to find skylarks in the US. I
That's
don't know if they're
possible.
still around though.
I don't feel like they would be, but it's possible. I don't know for sure. But Eugene Schieffelin had a quote attributed to him that made people think that he was a massive Shakespeare fan. So the quote was from an article that said something about how Eugene Schieffelin was a fanatic for bringing the birds of Shakespeare to the U.S., which if you look at the quote, people will take it literally, but I think it was somebody tongue in cheek just saying he wanted all the European birds to be in the U.S. So there's no actual connection between Eugene Schieffelin and William Shakespeare that anyone can find that's to say he was a fanatic and wanted birds in the US because of that reason. It was more likely he was just another acclimatization guy who just wanted this as his project and a hobby to bring these birds over. So starlings got in, and now we have tons of them. And you mentioned the house sparrow is just kind of a little brown bird. European starlings, if you look at them in poor lighting, they're just kind of dark colored. But if you look at them in the sun, they're iridescent and really pretty. So they're a species that is beloved in Europe in their native area, partially because of how pretty they are, partially because of how smart they are. They can even imitate a lot of different songs and calls and even noises, and then also for their murmurations, which are the massive undulating clouds of them that you see moving through the sky, now in the U.S. too, but especially in Europe, just massive dancing, undulating flocks.
Yeah,
You
so
found
this
something.
yeah, this is what's interesting about the skylark. There's some reports on the West Coast, but it looks like in British Columbia there's a
Okay.
concentration of them,
Yeah,
like all in one place.
that's goofy.
So this is like the Victoria International Airport. People will see them.
I wonder how long that's been going on for.
Looks like probably a long
Long
time.
while, yeah.
Wow, a really long time.
So it looks like if you want scarlet
1984.
skylarks in North America, you can go to BC.
Let's look at this record from 2016. Bam, look at them.
There it is. It's real.
Yeah, I wonder if that's where Ken went. Because I do remember him saying he had to go to a specific place to go see him. It looks like a lot of the time they are indeed in the sky. Oh, that's interesting.
Perfect. Love to see it.
It's funny because those species that don't really cause a lot of problems, it's just kind of a more interesting thing that you can find in a certain region. It's not like, oh, I can't, like, why did we bring, like, it depends how they fare, it seems. If they could only grab hold in one location, people seem to think it's more cool or interesting. But if they actually do better, people see it as like, oh, well, how dare they have taken over the whole region or whatever.
Yeah. I think we see that with a lot of the parrot species in the southern part of the country.
Yeah, although if you live next to those flocks, I think you're probably a little tired of hearing the squawking nonstop.
Maybe. I don't know if I'd get tired of it. But what do you think about starlings? What's your opinion of them?
I think they're really pretty, like really beautiful color, really talented mimics. I know some people have pet starlings. Was it Mozart who had a starling?
I think so.
One of them had like a pet starling. And so like I don't really dislike them. I feel like I haven't seen them doing really terrible things or trying to take over like a nest cavity that like I've had out for a bird, so I don't really have that personal experience with them. So normally when I see them, I'm just like, oh, starlings. And then I take pictures and videos of them and appreciate their color and kind of move on. But I'm sure in some areas they're more of a problem, and I'd probably have a different opinion then. Be cool to see in Europe with a lot of this stuff. I'm
Mm.
like, I'd love to see this in where it's native.
Yeah, what's funny about starlings, and there's other species like this as well, such as the pigeon is a big one. They concentrate so much in areas that we view as dirty. So starlings, you can find them a lot, farms where there's manure, cities, parks with short mowed grass with trash around. You just see them in areas where you're like, that looks like they enjoy being in the filth. So I think a lot of times people get that negative opinion of them because of that. And I also think there's this weird phenomenon where since we as humans inherently view ourselves and our inhabitations in cities as dirty, any creature that chooses to spend its time there, I think we also associate with dirtiness.
Well, I think some cities are dirtier than others. Some places
Portland.
you go, you're just like Portland. You're just like, this is great. Like, I love being in the city. And other places,
What
you're just
city has
like,
that been?
I mean, it depends what the neighborhood is like. Like, I was in Houston the other day, and I really liked the neighborhood I was in. I could spend more time here. Is kind of what
Let
I
me
was
ask you
thinking.
this. So the neighborhood was good?
Yeah.
Did you see any starlings?
Mm,
Case closed.
I did see pigeons though.
Okay.
So do with that what you will.
Well, I think with that, what I will do is move on to talking about pigeons, which
Go
have
for it.
a very fascinating backstory. I've been researching it lately. How much do you know about it? I've told you some bits.
I know a little bit, but I'm sure you know more than me at the
I
moment.
know more than everything.
All right, let's hear it.
So pigeons are originally bred from a bird called the rock dove, which lives in, I think it's Eurasia, and then mostly Eurasia with I think a little bit maybe in North Africa, but it might just be Eurasia. But rock dove looks pretty much exactly like the standard pigeon with the gray wings and body, the two dark
Pigeon
wing bars.
classic.
Yeah, the true classic, and then that iridescent but yet still dark kind of bluish neck and head. And they were originally cultivated for food. So people in like Mesopotamia and Egypt have hieroglyphs and tablets depicting pigeons as an important part of their culture. And somewhere along the way, people found out that they not only could be a good food source, but also could be really good for sending messages. So you had homing pigeons or carrier pigeons, where people would use those to deliver messages that were either too far of a distance, too inconvenient, or too dangerous for humans to do. Oh, there it is.
Looks like they're in India too, and they've
Eurasia.
really spread out. Look at how
Yes. And part of the
prevalent they
reason for
are.
that is, like I said, they were very useful. So to human civilizations, it was great to have pigeons because of the food source, because of the message carrying capability. In fact, in Greece, I think it was Julius Caesar actually had carrier pigeons that he would send messages out with. So they're a staple in history. You're
I
really
was trying
zooming in
to
there.
I was trying to see if we could see some pictures of them in their more natural habitat, but
Ah, gotcha.
it's
Their
working
natural
on. There's too
habitat
much
actually
pigeon
is
data. It can't handle
cliffs.
it.
Cliffs, rock ledges.
Well, and
That's
we
their
see them
area.
at Devil's Lake on the cliffs, and they look
Yep.
much more majestic there.
Yes, absolutely. If they're a bird that you didn't associate again with dirty cities, then you would probably think that they were quite beautiful. It looks like those are some cities where the concentrations are too. One guy is taking pictures here.
They're
Well,
on a sidewalk.
their natural habitat.
We'll have to. It's like, what is this?
Maybe a Christmas light
Natural?
or something. I don't know.
Let's see what else we can find in the remote areas of the world. This one's on a power
On a power
line. Dang
line.
it. We can't get away
That
from it.
doesn't even actually really look like the normal pigeon, the rock dove that you would see. You might actually have to do rock dove, Derek, instead of rock pigeon.
It was not an option.
Okay. Because see,
Well, these
that's
are all listed
listed
as
as
feral.
feral. So I don't know where you're gonna find a clean one. But that's actually something that's worth mentioning as well, is that now the populations have been so spread out, changed. They don't even know where there are necessarily authentic rock doves anymore. There's some concentrations that seem pretty good, but it's really hard to tell because of the interbreeding and the domestication and all of that stuff.
Wow, look at this one in front of the Eiffel Tower.
That is majestic.
That is like, that is,
That's peak right there.
that's beautiful.
Top tier. 172 ratings and it got a 5 stars.
It deserves a five-star rating.
I feel like somebody was just waiting there all day, like a
Look at these
pigeon's gonna
two.
land here.
Aw,
Aw,
how can you not love that?
they're cute, silly birds.
That's nice.
That is nice. Anyway, pigeons got carted all over the world because of their usefulness. And then they were either released or escaped and turned into what they are today. Look at that. There's a nice colored one with some white and an
This
interesting
one?
pattern. That's the thing about them too, is they've actually been bred in such crazy ways that people bred them certain breeds to be bigger. So basically, just as food, they look more like chickens than pigeons. And then for sport, so they bred some that could fly really fast and evade really well. So they've just gone crazy with different breeds of pigeons. But
Look,
they
they're
released or
running through a
escaped.
field.
Yeah, that's majestic too.
I think
And
those are
then did
poppies, if I'm not
I
mistaken.
think so. They did really well in the habitats that they got released in, and now we have pigeons all over the place. And the hate for the pigeon, we both agree, is too much. They don't really do anything. There's nothing that they really do that's bad. They just kind of exist and feed on seeds and grains. So
Well,
it's
I don't
not
know
like
if it
they're
was
necessarily
confirmed, but didn't
pushing native
people
stuff
think
out.
they spread disease? Wasn't that part of it too? That
Yeah, so there was an incident where two people I think got sick back in like the mid to late 1900s, and they attributed it to pigeons without that really being the cause, most likely. There's not actually a lot of diseases that pigeons can spread to humans.
yeah, there was this
I think
interesting
it was the
article.
60s that they were tabbed to rats with wings,
So it was
and
kind of
that
a
kind of sealed
campaign
it.
against them, is what you're.
Yeah, so public opinion on them really changed between the 30s and the 70s, and then
Okay,
people
you
started to
gotta
strongly
you gotta
dislike
see
them.
this article I found the other day. You ready for this headline?
Yep.
Man ends up in ICU after getting chlamydia from bird feeding.
Wow.
It was something with he was like hand feeding stuff, I think.
What were you looking up to get this?
It popped up, like it found me.
What does that say about you?
That I look up a lot of bird feeding stuff. Does it say how he got it? Part of his feeding routine included hand feeding, and he occasionally would get bird droppings on his clothing. So some like kind of, uncleanly feeding practices. So if you're just
Mhm.
a regular person bird feeding, I don't think you have to worry about getting chlamydia
Yeah,
normally.
hopefully. The thing about pigeons too, people don't like is obviously they just poop everywhere. So their poop is acidic and they'll erode statues and things like that. So they'll be in places where they're concentrated in their populations, like large cities, and that means there's going to be pigeon poop everywhere.
So what you were talking about with birds being in kind of uncleanly places and talking about the starlings at the farms, the cowbirds also fit in there too. With you'll see them in the flocks
Yep.
of birds at barns and stuff. And so
Even though they're
even though they're
native.
native, they kind of fit in with that kind of vibe.
I think a lot of people, and I haven't confirmed this, but I kind of feel like a lot of people that don't know much about birds and especially cowbirds probably assume that the cowbird is not native
I don't
because of how
know.
much trouble they cause and how people have a negative opinion of them. I don't know if people always know that they're actually native.
But let's move on to some of the other ones that I feel like people have a more favorable opinion, like the European goldfinch.
Yeah. So we have an interesting situation in the Midwest here, specifically Chicago and the areas just north of it. Is as I was saying, there was that big release slash escape of European birds. So there's a nice population of European goldfinches, mostly in Illinois, but they do get into Wisconsin in the southern part. And there used to be one bird feed store in Kenosha where you could get them really reliably.
Those were the
And then
days.
uh, no, that feed store shut down. So now you just get random flocks of them moving around. And there's some places where you can get them more easily than others. But you do kind of have to come to that part of the country, I believe, to get European goldfinch. I don't think there's really anywhere else you can get them easy.
Well, we also have there's a population of presumed breeding great tits in the
No, they
state
are
of
breeding.
Wisconsin. They're for sure breeding.
Yeah, they've been categorized on the breeding bird atlas.
Oh, cool. That you can find in certain places, and that's one that, they haven't really caused any issues yet. They just kind of hang out. They're fun to see. So there
Yeah,
were
and
some
they
people that
could cause
were
issues.
they could, but they haven't.
Well, here's why they could cause issues, and this is weird. They'll sometimes kill hibernating bats.
Yeah, I don't see that being a problem, but
Well, bats have a lot of problems with white nose syndrome, plus the
yeah, but
potential of great tit attack.
I would think because you have chickadees occupying that niche too, of kind of like small, tit species of bird, that you wouldn't get them out competing all of the other species, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't believe they've caused major problems, and they certainly haven't spread to a large extent. But it is interesting that people now come to Wisconsin to get the great tits. It's a bird that people have asked us about, and they can be kind of reliable in, especially winter time when they'll come to feeders, a lot less so in summer. But they are a bird that people have interest in seeing now.
Yeah. And then there's also a lot of cool, I think they're cool, exotics in other places, such as
Yep.
Houston has the red-vented bulbul population that's breeding there, which is a really beautiful species. You can find red-whiskered bulbul in certain places. I think those are all from escaped pets, but it's kind of wild that there's enough to have a breeding population of escaped pets. And like, how many people have released their pet bulbul slash even had one to be able to do that? Like, I just find that interesting. Then
That's
you
a
have
very
all the
fair point.
parrots, the macaws down in Florida.
Well, let's talk about some of
Hawaii's got a
the
bunch of non-natives
I
too,
don't even want to get into Hawaii. Hawaii, I think, is mostly non-native at this point. We don't even need
which
to
is
talk about it.
sad.
It could be its own episode for sure. But what we should talk about is some of the ones that we did actually see in Florida that are now naturalized. So
E-
spot-breasted oriole,
Egyptian
the
goose.
Egyptian goose, and then gray-headed swamp hen.
Yeah.
Those are
The
really
gray-headed swamp
fascinating.
hen, I think, is actually causing problems though.
It can because it outcompetes things like purple
And
gallinule
I think
because they're a
every
little
time we
bigger.
saw them, almost they were eating a plant or something.
That's
They were
true.
really going to town on the
They were eating a
vegetation.
plant and then leering at a purple gallinule.
Well, they're big too. They're bigger than the purple gallinules.
Yes. But when I first heard about gray-headed swamp hens, I was like, what? Really? Like, there's an invasive, non-native purple bird in Florida that's not a gallinule. So I was just excited to see him when we were in Florida. But a lot of people that were birders seem to have that negative opinion. Like, oh, we want to find gray-headed swamp hen. And then they were like, don't worry, you will.
They were in more places than I thought they would be.
They kind of acted like parrots with how they ate because they would grip stuff with their feet
Yeah.
and then start munching on it.
Yeah, that's true. And then as far as the parrots and parakeets go, we did have yellow chevron. A lot of monk parakeets. The more I learn about them, the more I feel like they're in a lot of different places, or at least they used to be. I don't know if the
Yeah, they
populations still
are.
are.
And monk parakeets are a bird that we've talked about a lot in different videos, but they are worth mentioning for sure because they're really fascinating. So they come from the more temperate parts of South America. I think Argentina has a big population of them, if I'm not mistaken, and they can handle cold weather. So they're able to survive in places like Chicago, where there's a big population of them in and around the city. And they survive in large part because A, they can eat a variety of food, including seeds. So they can actually go to bird feeders and survive if they need to. And then B, they make massive stick nests that are very well insulated. So even though the weather gets really harsh and cold in the winter in Chicago and other places like that, they can still withstand it and then survive. And they do cause problems with their nests because they tend to build them on electrical transformers. So sometimes fires can spark because of that and then shut down grids. So they need to make sure that they're managed, and sometimes they have to go take them down to avoid that kind of thing happening.
Yeah. Here's another one that I feel like if you go to certain places, they're everywhere, and that's the mute swan, and they
Yep.
can be pretty aggressive too.
Yeah, that's one I kind of forgot about as a non-native, but they
We
also
don't
can
have a lot
outcompete the
here, so
ones.
I feel like we don't think about it that often.
Yeah, you know where they do have a ton though?
Ohio,
New Jersey.
Michigan, yeah, New Jersey. I feel like
New
there's just
Jersey had a
concentrations where
ton.
they're everywhere.
Yeah, if you actually look at a range map, it does have little pockets of them more than just a blanket range. So for
Yeah,
whatever
definitely.
reason, even though they're spread out across a lot of the country, it doesn't seem like they're just all over the country. Seems like you have to go to specific places to find them if you want them in large numbers.
Yeah, Eurasian collar dove.
Yeah, Eurasian collared dove.
We
Those
another
are in
one
a
we
lot of
saw today.
places. For some reason with those, I just don't feel like they're that much of a problem again.
Well, I feel like they're a dove. You just see him sitting on a wire. You're like he's not really causing any problems, but they can compete with other native species.
Yeah. I don't know if they cause issues. I would have to do more research on those. I'm always surprised when I see them in other states because they're a little more prevalent in other places.
Yeah, and then you have the scaly-breasted munia that you can
I know
find in
almost
certain
nothing about
places.
those.
They're like the little spice finches. They will just kind of come to people's feeders and stuff. I don't think they've really been known to cause problems, but they're an interesting species to see. And I actually got to see my first one because I was helping with a banding effort where they were trying to ban some of them at somebody's house. And so I got to go with the biologist and see if we could ban any of them. None of them ended up going in the trap that we had set up, but it was cool to see them hanging out there.
No, sounds cool.
And then how about this one? This one's kind of, I feel like a special case is the Western cattle egret.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because to everybody's knowledge, they actually made it here by themselves. So they're a species that was from Africa and then assumed to have just flown across the Atlantic Ocean, landed somewhere in South America, moved up through Central America, and then found success in the US as well. Now, a little bit of that is because of the way that large animals were cultivated in the United States. So they do like to spend time around cattle, which will kick up insects and things for them to eat. So a lot of times when you see them, you do see them in cattle pastures and places like that, following the large animals. So while humans didn't expressly bring them here, they did have a hand in making them have the ability to spread. But they're pretty cool. It feels better to see a cattle egret than it does to see some of these other non-native species.
It almost feels like you're seeing them in a natural habitat because they will follow the cattle. So you're just kind of like, oh yeah, he's doing his thing.
Well,
So,
it's kind
so
of
I
funny
don't know.
because it feels like you just got to tip your hat to them. You
Yeah,
look at the other species like the house sparrows and the starlings, you're like, ah, geez. But then you look at the cattle egret and you're like, hey, you did this on your own. Good for you.
presumably. Or I guess it could have been
Presumably.
ship assisted, huh?
Maybe. People seem to think that they flew across the ocean.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I got one more, which is the Indian peafowl, the
I
peacock.
don't know of any areas where they're actually living wild successfully to a large degree. I
Can't you
think there's
find them
some
in
small
Florida?
pockets. Yeah,
Aren't
but I think
they?
it's like a block. Like they live in one block there. I don't think they're just roaming.
It's still countable, I think, though, is it not?
It might be countable, but it
Yeah.
doesn't feel like it should be countable. We've seen them in Wisconsin before. I mean, someone
Well, in
has
the
them here.
zoo, you see them in the
No,
zoo
no,
too.
no.
They
I've
roam.
seen them like out in the countryside.
Yeah, I
I'm
don't think
assuming
that's
because someone
countable
had a
though.
farm with them though.
Yeah. And
So there
then
it is.
I'm trying to think if we missed anything. There's a bunch more parrots and things in that vein.
I mean, there's some interesting ones too that have sort of a wild population, but also a captive like Muscovy duck. Muscovy ducks you can find wild if you go to the Rio Grande Valley, but then you can also find non-wild Muscovy ducks in other parts of the country.
Yeah, then I think sometimes you can find African collared doves in certain places, but I think they're really hard to tell from the Eurasian collared dove. This is making me feel like doing a full video on this would be cool.
Like
Like,
just everything.
yeah, or at least like, 10 of these non-native species that are thriving in the United States. I
You'd
wonder
have to
what
just go the
species
usual suspects first.
I wonder what species of ours are thriving in Europe.
I know gray squirrels.
I was thinking more birds.
No, I figured.
So I don't know how accurate this is, but I got ruddy duck.
Hmm.
Considered invasive due to hybridization with the endangered native white-headed duck.
No.
Canada goose.
Yep, I could see that.
Wood duck.
Hmm.
Introduced to Europe mainly in ornamental collections.
I feel like the wood duck is North America's answer to the mandarin duck.
Yeah, in a way. That's interesting. Who would have thought the ruddy duck, though?
They don't seem like they would be invasive. I guess they just got over there and they were ready to hybridize.
Yeah, yeah, I guess so. I guess what's your take on non-native species? Do you feel like it's important to tell people about them? Do you feel like it does more harm than good? What's your take kind of now having done a lot of research on this?
It's a tough situation to deal with because, again, many of them are so widespread that you just can't really get rid of them. You know, starlings, pigeons, house sparrows, you can't do anything about. So I think you just have to educate people on how to make sure their space is as friendly as possible for native birds. Because like you were talking about with the house wren box, if we didn't realize the house sparrow was trying to get in, and we didn't make the hole smaller, house sparrow would have taken over. The house sparrow breeds where the house wren may not get to breed, then it would have to go somewhere else. So you want to educate people on what they can do in their little patch to make it as safe for native birds as possible. And then when you have situations where non-natives are pushing out native birds, then you have to start taking action on that. Or even we have situations where native birds are pushing out native birds, like the brown-headed cowbird and the Kirtland's warbler. So now cowbirds are managed where the Kirtland's warblers are breeding. So you
Yeah,
have
I
those
think
situations.
that's the big one for me is when it's really impacting like a threatened species or a species that's really in decline and they have to actively do management. Because I'm just not the kind of person that would want to be like, yeah, I'm trapping all the house sparrows in the yard and like dispatching them. Like that just
Yep.
doesn't seem like something I would want to do or
Yeah.
enjoy doing. And I think most nature lovers kind of feel that same way, you know? And I don't think that it's not the bird's fault that they're there. And like around the yard, it's like, yeah, there's house sparrows, but you can do things to kind of have them feed in a different place. But I'm not the kind of person that wants to be out there like harming any nature, you know?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's about educating without demonizing.
Hmm.
And that's why in a lot of the videos that we make that talk about the negative impacts of these birds, I always try to fit in that that's a lot of people's opinions and why they dislike them. But I'm not saying you should actively go out and hate them. So even though a bird is hated by a lot of the population, that doesn't mean that you should go out there and just kill them.
Well,
And with a lot of the birds, you can't.
and you shouldn't. But,
Well, I'm saying like a lot of birds that are nuisances, like cowbirds, it's illegal. So,
well, the Migratory Bird Act, but even native species people don't like. Like, people don't like mourning doves, which was a shock. They're like, oh, they're fat and they just bully everything. And it's like, they're just a big bird. They're just eating their seed. Or like
blue
blue
jays,
jays, people don't
grackles.
like. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff where people have opinions of native species that are just kind of like because of what's going on in their yard space, basically.
My favorites are the people that don't like the ones that wake them up in the morning. So they'll just be like, I hear this stupid
The
mockingbird
limpkin.
every day. Oh, the limpkin in Florida, yeah.
Yeah, well, mockingbirds will sing throughout the night. And I was in Los Angeles once, and there was one singing outside the window, and you're like, what's up with that guy? Is he like wired on
Stop it.
caffeine or something?
Get help.
He's really trying to find a mate. He's like, I missed the daytime window. I need to work overtime to get a
Yeah.
female. There's a female off in the next town that's like, wow, what a dedicated male.
Maybe he just likes to sing.
Maybe. Well, I think that kind of wraps up our invasive species. Well, I guess our non-native species talk, but I'd be curious to hear people's opinions in the comments. People have a lot of opinions about these birds.
Yeah, was there anything we didn't mention that's actually in a large enough population to warrant talking about? If you have
I think
one
those were the
budgie in your
main.
neighborhood, we don't need to hear about it. But if you have a colony of something out there that's not supposed to be there, I would be curious to
I
know.
think those were the main groups. In the parrot video we made, people also talked about the red-masked parakeets in San Francisco. That's kind of a famous population. I never thought they were red-masked, though. I'd heard about it, but I always assumed they were a different species.
I mean, we
'Cause I
could
feel
do an
like that's
entire
not.
video just on parrots again. We could do a
Yeah,
podcast
but
just on parrots.
that's not one that I hear about in the general public unless people live there. Then they'll mention it. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's interesting to hear what people have in their neighborhood. I guess as far as parrots, you know the red crown Amazon's really common too. The green parakeets in South Texas, the Nande parakeets in Florida. They're all kind of similar as far as how they act and what they do, though. You know, very loud, normally coming into roost at night,
Hmm.
hanging out by a Whataburger parking lot.
That's their move.
Yeah. But they've definitely changed the landscape of birding and neighborhoods too.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
And it will continue to change, I'm sure, and we'll probably even get new non-native species. I am glad there's not, well, I guess the house sparrow and starling are probably the closest, but one that has just like wiped out a bunch of birds in the mainland US and Hawaii, that's probably more of an issue. But there hasn't been. I'm thinking of the grass carp and well, not the carp, but the big head carp that if they get into Lake Michigan, they could like destroy the
Game
entire
over.
thing. So they have those barriers that are like they have like an electric current running through to try to stop them. I feel like there's not a bird necessarily where we're like if that gets into the US, everything's ruined. At least not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Or that's
There's
like,
probably one out there.
a locust plague that's going to destroy
Right.
all the native species or something.
I'm sure it's out there.
Yeah, I wonder if there's one where scientists are like, oh, as long as such and such doesn't come here, we'll be okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think people have moved so many birds around that it would have to be a specific situation. I think you could have something that could take over a part of the country. So, we're talking about gray-headed swamp hens. I think that's a problem. So there's probably stuff that would do well in Florida that would flourish, but I think not so much the entire country. But we do talk about the barred owls, a native species, taking out the spotted owl.
Oh, here, okay. Um, Common Myna is one that comes to
We
mind
have those already.
that I searched. But if they got more prevalent, because apparently they're an extremely aggressive cavity nester,
Oh,
would
just like
compete
the
with
house sparrow.
bluebirds, woodpeckers, wrens, eats fruits, insects, and garbage, thrives in urban environments. Very high risk if introduced to the southern U.S. Already intercepted in Florida before full establishment.
I swear we have those already.
I think we do. I don't know what the numbers are though. So yeah, that's interesting.
That is interesting. They'll be coming to a feeder near you to eat your garbage.
Hopefully not. But yeah. All right. Well, let us know about non-native species in the comments below. Thanks everyone for watching and listening to this episode of the Badgerland Birding Podcast.